Delighted to begin with a perspective from the grassroots, or rather 4 views of what social justice means. I neglected to say that our lens, our way of viewing poverty this year, is to talk about social justice, which is partly about poverty, but also about other equalities issues as well. It's about fairness. It's about tackling inequalities. So we want to have some personal perspectives on what social injustice means and what social justice would look like in Scotland in the future. And we've asked our 4 speakers to use their imagination, draw upon their own experience, and also think ambitiously about the future. I'd like to introduce who's here to speak in this first session. Just going on from my right, first of all, I'd like to introduce Innocent Jakisa, who was also here, he reminds me, 3 years ago at the very first Tackling Poverty Assembly. Innocent has a very detailed biography, which I won't speak through, but I'll just pick out the fact that he's been involved in a number of activities for the Poverty Alliance. He's a fellow traveller with the Poverty Alliance, including a couple of years ago attending a European roundtable on social inclusion. So lots of experience of speaking in these kind of forums. Then moving on, Hazel Ratcliffe, who's next to Innocent, who's from Fife, spends a lot of time working with Gingerbread in Fife, and is going to be talking about the important work they've been doing for many years in Fife, but also most recently with Poverty Alliance from Plenary in Fife. Next to Hazel is John Wood. John is an activist with the Scottish Drugs Forum in Glasgow, and as well as his involvement with the Scottish Drugs Forum, has been involved with Poverty Alliance, and this might be quite interesting, with Job Centre Plus, and specifically working for the introduction of the forthcoming Scottish Welfare Fund. And then last but by no means least, the left-hand side there is Zara Kitson, who's been a community activist for a number of years, has been heavily involved in the EPIC project. We hear a number of things today and tomorrow about EPIC, Evidence Participation into Change, with Poverty Alliance from Stirling, or worked in Stirling, and has most recently been involved in the So Say Scotland Citizens Assembly. That's quite a mouthful for this time of the morning, but please welcome our panel of speakers. Thank you. So we've to begin with in this session, a couple of questions we'd like to use to get us going. And what we'd like to do is use this 25-30 minutes or so to listen in to what these brave folks have got to say, who are opening the event for us. To begin with, we'll just go along the panel in this order, if that's okay with you. So beginning with you, Innocent. Our first question to begin with is, if we think about what represents social injustice in your experience, in your lives, what are the things that most come to mind in Scotland when we think about injustice? Innocent, can I start with you?
Well, thank you very much. That's quite a very good question. In order for me to be able to answer that question, I'll begin by quoting from a book entitled Poverty in Scotland 2011. And it says that poverty and disadvantage are part and parcel of the larger questions around social justice and social injustice. Now, clearly, whenever we talk about social injustice or social justice, a few words come into perspective. One is the question of disadvantage. The other one is the question of discrimination. And let me pitch this to my own work, my own experience in terms of trying to find employment in this country. I have done everything within my own means to ensure that I actually become an active, contributing member of society. I've gone through university. I've gone through all sorts of traineeship programs to be able to become employable, but the challenge has always continued to be getting an employment which is permanent. And it's even becoming more challenging now that we have a multitude of people with high experience out there, highly educated out there, because of the redundancies that are happening. Now, when all that begins to happen, then you begin to ask yourself, how fair will the system be if all the time you are trying to find something to do, you're pitched against highly educated, highly experienced, so many years. I've received letters to say, this time you're not successful because the person who actually got the job is highly experienced and highly more qualified. The other thing that I've realized was another letter that I received recently, that this job was role specific. Now, in that kind of state, you begin to ask yourself, will there be any justice at all? And I think there are subtleties around discrimination come in, because I fall in the category of being black, being a refugee in this country, being disabled, and of course the other one, which is very obvious, being short. Now, if you appear before a panel, one thing that clearly comes out is these things will play in a way. But anyway, is there hope? I think there is hope, because I've continued to make sure that I'll continue to work hard and gain that experience. At the moment, I'm a trainee at the Golden Jubilee National Hospital, Qualities and Engagement Office. Thank you very much. That's my experience in terms of justice.
Thank you very much. Hazel.
I think personally, in speaking about lone parents in Fife, the biggest issue of social injustice would be the lack of jobs available. It's so difficult to get a job, as Innocent said, for everybody. There's no jobs available, but to be a single parent on top of that and have all the barriers that you're faced with as a single parent makes it 10 times worse. The barriers could be childcare. Childcare isn't available in all areas, and it's very expensive if you're a single parent trying to work and pay your childcare. Transport issues on top of that, if you don't drive, try to get affordable transport to take your children to the childminders to then go to your job is really difficult. We could talk here for hours about social injustice for lone parents, and a report that we've just done clearly shows all the barriers that's faced by lone parents. Childcare and transport come out the big ones, and then on top of that would be the stigma and the attitudes that you get from organisations that you're trying to go to for support, and the stigma that you're a lone parent, that your benefits scrounger, they try to say that you're not working because you're lazy, and it's just not the case. Through a report we worked with a large number of single parents, and the majority of them did want to work, but these barriers were just preventing us from trying to get a job. So I would say childcare, transport issues, and the attitude and the stigma for lone parents is probably the biggest issues that come to mind.
Cheers. For me, social injustice is represented by the government, simply. The government don't realise what it is like to come from an addict's perspective, because he's never lived there. You know, they live in the top 1% of this population in their glass houses, with multiple bedrooms. To come through addiction, you know, it was all caused by myself. And addicts are like, you know, we chose a way of drugs. The government have a statistic saying that people need 5 attempts in a treatment centre before gaining recovery. Well, let me tell you, that is wrong. I've done it once. Many people have done it once. You gain recovery after 13 years in my personal experience. And then the government put barriers in your way. They introduce you onto benefits where you're discriminated, as people have said. You're labellised, you're stigmatised. Once an addict, always an addict. Wrong. I'm just a normal human being. You know, I've got the same rights. I'm the same as you, no different. Might have been an addict in the past, not today. Might have done some dirty, rotten things in my life, but not today. Gaining recovery, as I say, and then obstacles and hurdles and barriers are put in my way because of my past life experience. I'm judged. Introduced into a workfare programme. See that word workfare? Who's it fair for? It's fair for the companies and the charities that the government are paying £2,278 a year to have somebody working for them. Is it fair for me? Come on, you all know the famous quote by Kevin Bridges. You're sent to work in the pound shop where everything's worth £1 but you. You know, to quote a good friend of mine, do you think I went to my guidance teacher in school and said, I want to be a junkie for the next 13 years? Did I help? Did I help? It was unfortunate that that's what happened to me. That £2,278 that the government pump into these people that exploit people to do forced labour because you're sanctioned on your benefits if you don't turn up. You're not even given a bus pass to get there. Is a £1 billion turnover for them over the course of a year, which would be better spent in job sustainability. But the government won't do that. And why not? Because there's not enough money to be made for them in job sustainability. I could sit and talk all day about the government and about how they impose all these barriers and hurdles. But I can't do it in a political manner where it's acceptable to them, where it would be taken on board and my views and my opinions would be listened to. As I say, once an addict, always an addict. People that are in the government haven't lived that life and they band about a word anecdotal quite a lot. Well, let me tell you, I'm tangible evidence that recovery is possible and that barriers and hurdles put in place can be overcome.
Thanks. What a brilliant story. Stories. And I think for me, just trying to process this and I was thinking about what is social justice. And that's what I was asked to think about. And I was like, what is social justice? And I was like, what will I do to explore this? I'll ask people and I've had conversations. And of course I Googled it. What's Google saying? What is social justice? And the first few things that came up, there was a couple of government websites, and on the first one, it was the Department of Work and Pensions government website, and this is the story that we're telling ourselves on government websites. Social justice is about giving individuals and families facing multiple disadvantages the support and tools they need to turn their lives around. The second thing was a think tank, and it said that they were there to embed social justice in the heart of British politics, to change British politics. And I thought, there's something really wrong with the story we're telling ourselves about social justice. Because these two things, for me, infer that actually social justice, about giving individuals and families facing, so that's about, again, we're buying into the myth and we're giving away power, and that we don't have our own personal power, which we know not to be the case, because people like John, who are embodying their own individual power and working for justice and believing in change, we're all living this. For me, that is social justice. And let's change the story that we're telling ourselves about what social justice is. So I've not actually thought much about injustice, because I feel that we all know what injustice is. But when I was thinking about what social justice is, for me, it's about power. It's about resource, and it's about relationships. And it's about the power that we all embody, and every individual on planet Earth, never mind on Scotland, every individual all across the world, embodying their own individual personal power and using that for good for all, and having a meaningful life and sense of purpose. And about resource, It's about having enough water, having enough food, having enough shelter, having enough voice. And relationships, I was thinking that it's about how all these things relate to each other, because it's about how we as human beings actually all take care and relate to each other. Not just about how government relates to citizens or to people, but how in our individual lives, are we acting in a socially just way with our neighbours? Do we act in a socially just way with our relatives? I think social justice for me is a much wider thing, and it's embodied in all of us, and the actions that we take, and in the decisions that we make, and the behaviour that we display, and how we look to continually develop and grow and move into that place of everyone having enough. Imagine a world where everyone had enough. We all had enough water, we all had enough food, we all had enough voice, and we're all just having great crack all the time together. To me, that's social justice, and I think that's where we need to be focusing, and it's great. I feel I was just when I was coming in here, and I knitted the loo, and I popped out because there is a point to this story. But no, a woman. I said, we're living in exciting times, and I came out and I said, oh, did you just say we're living? She said, yes, I did. Positivity, and I said, indeed. We are living in exciting times, and I really believe that. I think there's so much opportunity, so much challenge. Absolutely, a lot of challenge, but we know that through challenge is actually how we come to new meaning of things and how we develop. And so I really feel that there's so much opportunity in all the challenges that we face, and it's about how we can connect to each other, all as human beings, in a collaborative way, because we're all in it together. The people that work in government, yes, we can, there's a government, but they're also people. We're all people, even the blessed bankers, they might have a million times more money, but they don't have a million times more happiness. And we know that actually the narrower the gap between rich and poor, and we've got the fourth most unequal society in Britain, but we know that the narrower that gap, the happier everyone is in that society. And I think that we need to move towards thinking of a oneness of us all, and how we can all collaborate together and move into that really positive space that I'm beginning to see. I really feel that we're moving into that.
Thank you, Zara. Now, Zara has quite skillfully anticipated the second part of the question, which is to move on to what needs to change. And you've talked about power, resources, relationships. I'm going to ask each of you really briefly if there's one big shift that needs to take place. Let's say in the next 5 or 10 years, what would that be? What path would it be on? And you've kind of anticipated, but do you want to add anything to what you said, Zara?
Okay, yeah, and I feel that I did kind of skip out the last. I didn't really answer much about injustice, but again, because I feel that what we know about, I've got a really good friend who's been imparting all sorts of knowledge, and I've been on a real learning journey recently because I love to learn, and we've been talking a lot about physics. And we all know, well, I mean, I didn't know, but according to quantum physics and the laws of physics, and in terms of even thinking about gardening, we know that what we focus on grows. So if we continue to focus on the challenge of what we're faced with, then in a way we're growing that challenge. And that is just the laws of physics. And that's what we're going to continue to do. So I think we need to move to a place where we're actually visioning, because again, we know that we can't get to where we want to go unless we know what it is we want, and to actually vision and dream and imagine about where it is we want to get to. And that's where we focus our energy and channel it. And it's even in terms of language, moving in terms of anti-poverty. Let's move into a place where we're thinking of pro-being, peace, instead of anti-violence. Let's just talk about pro-peace or peace. And I feel that even in terms of the language we use and the story we're telling ourselves, and I think that shift, and if it's a mindset. And I think that if we can embody ourselves with the skills to do that, I really feel that there will be there will be.
Thank you.
Isn't it wonderful when there is such a quick shift?
Who thought we would be talking about physics? Gardening this morning. Zara, thank you very much for the important point about putting more positive energy into what the vision might be. I want to come to John, because John, you talked about a personal story of recovery, but you also talked about stigma and discrimination and negative attitudes. You talked about the government and employers, but I guess you might also mean to some extent public opinion as well. What would be the one thing you would want to see changed to add up to progress to social justice?
Attitude, the way people perceive people. I said earlier, but any addict, not just myself, any addict, any alcoholic, any person with mental health, any person involved in any service anywhere is no different from somebody sitting in Parliament. The only difference is they get paid 6 figures and I get paid a fiver for doing a bit of voluntary. Attitudes need to change. We need to make this a more fairer, equal Scotland, and not just Scotland, UK, worldwide. How do we do that? We do it by challenging the people that pass legislation like Human Rights Act 1998, the Equalities Act 2010, and get them to understand what it is that they've passed and apply that to the people that are living on the breadline, people that are living in poverty. I see pieces of legislation broke all the time, and I'm not here to quote them and challenge them. The Workfare programme, there was recently a case that went through court on Article 2. I bet the government didn't see that one coming. The bedroom tax that has just been introduced, or is going to be introduced very shortly. The members of Parliament are demanding, not asking, they're demanding a 32% pay rise every year. And then they're charging the taxpayer for their second home, whilst they're charging people in poverty for an additional bedroom. Where is the fairness in that? What type of attitude does somebody in Parliament earning 6 figures have when they're taking from the poor? It's a Robin Hood syndrome, isn't it? They take from the poor and give it to the rich. This whole attitude is geared toward the top 1% of the population. Anybody that's not a multi-millionaire that wholeheartedly believes this government have their best interests at heart is painfully misguided. DWP attitudes need to change. You need to get rid of the factory production line where you're churned out just to tick a box. Caseloads need to be reduced. You need to have a person-centred approach where they've got the time to manage that person that's coming before them. Peer-led organisations where we can go in and we can reflect on the work that's being done there, the changes that need to be made. Who better to do that than people that are living that life? People that are signing on day after day, facing sanctions week after week, rather than have the government arbitrate it, where they can cover stuff up with legalities and political issues. Again, I could go on and on and on about this. People that have been involved in services need to have the whole of society, as you said, need to have their opinions overlooked about that. Who's different? A lawyer that takes drugs at the weekend, or an addict that takes drugs every day. No one. We're both doing the same. We're both breaking the law. We're no different. But however, a lawyer is highly respected in the community, where somebody that begs, borrows, and steals is in the gutter. We're no different. Attitudes need to change.
Thanks very much, John. And John, you've also anticipated at least 2, if not 3, of the workshop sessions around attitudes, bedroom tax, and the jobs market. So these things are going to be given much more discussion straight after this session. So thank you for that. Hazel, you talked about stigma as well, specifically around towards lone parents, but you also talked about childcare and transport costs. So I'm going to be really strict with our last 2 speakers just because of time. If there was a priority to be changed from your experience in Fife, working with Gingerbread, what would that be, Hazel?
I think, as John said, the attitude, I think if you could change the attitude and take away that stigma for lone parents, it would relieve quite a lot of pressure. Let lone parents be lone parents, and let lone parents stay at home and bring up their children if that's what they want to do. And then you'll probably find some lone parents I'll maybe go into childcare, and then that's your childcare kind of covered. So I think if you remove that pressure away, remove the pressure and the attitude away from parents, you'll have happier parents, happier children. I think that would make a massive difference. So probably attitude, change the attitude. And
thank you. Really interesting. We have such agreement, really, on the importance of something that is so hard to change, but so important that it does change. Thank you, Hazel. And finally, innocence. You talked about employment. You talked about multiple forms of prejudice, discrimination. What would be your big shift in Scotland?
My big shift is this whole idea of translating the affirmative action and positive action into practice. And because of this idea that employment is one way and one route out of poverty. And if that is translated into, something that is practical, that should therefore give us what we call shared good practice. Are there things that we can learn from those who have actually moved from just no job to something that is actually keeping them, working away? So that shared good practice, if documented in some of the sites of the Poverty Alliance, would give us what we call hope, but it also gave us what we call role models, people from whom we could possibly look up to and draw lessons out of. None of us would want to remain stereotyped, because one of the biggest things, of course, are stereotypes. How do we get out of that? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you to all of our speakers. Please join me in thanking them.